Okay, so let's get started. Hello, everyone. I'm Meg Bouvier. You know me as the person who developed the library of courses that you have access to. I'm a neuroscientist turned NIH staff writer turned full-time NIH grant writer, and I'm coming to you live from Western Massachusetts, where it is swelteringly hot, although we're getting a little break from the heat today. And I'm here to answer your questions about any NIH submissions at all. So bring it on. So for those of you who are joining us for the first time, you are in listen only mode. However, there's a Q&A box and you can type your questions in there. And I see that there's one already in there for me, which is great. If you have anything to add to the discussion that we're having, feel free to put that in the chat box, but do try to keep the questions in the Q&A box because that's where I will be looking for them. So I do have a mini tutorial today on what to ask the PO before you write your application, but because we're beginning with a question, I'm just going to go straight to that before we do the tutorial. So, and feel free to put the questions in there at any point during this half hour. So the question is, I'm very confused as to whether or not one can use URLs to lab web pages or to a full biography of references on the biosketch or not. Your notes and my pre-award folks are telling me different things. Can you clarify what, if any, links can show up on the biosketch? Thank you. This is a great question because the general rule of thumb is that URLs are not allowed in page-limited sections of federal grant applications because it is seen as circumventing the page limits. The one exception is the biosketch. You are allowed to put URLs in the biosketch. And in fact, I think even the NIH sample of the biosketch has a hyperlink at the very end underneath the contribution to science section. There's a link to the, like SciEnv or my bibliography or, wherever the person's full bibliography is. So even in their sample, there is a URL in the NIH sample of the biosketch. So the biosketch is the one page limited section of a federal grant application where you are in fact allowed to insert hyperlinks. So Julie, is that consistent with what your pre-award support office is telling you? And if that was, could you please point me to the best resource for info on formatting requirements for, oh, this is a separate question, sorry. So Julie, does that answer your question about, is it consistent with what your pre-award support office is telling you? I'm not sure if there was some confusion in my trainings. I apologize for that. The biosketch is definitely the one place that's page limited where you can include a URL. So hopefully that'll answer your question. Okay, so I know this pre-award support person, and she's usually very good. I know that I've asked her questions about T32s. She's very, very good. But this is the one instance where that is not correct. And I know Barbara, so have her email me, and I'd be happy to talk that through with her. So it's definitely allowed. And I can point her, I can attach the NIH sample that shows the hyperlink to like my bibliography or whatever it is. So yeah, just have Barbara reach out to me and I'll talk that through with her. They're definitely allowed in the biosketch. Okay, we have another question. Could you please point me to the best resource for info on formatting requirements for an NI-NH R34 grant, please? So in terms of formatting requirements, they're going to be the general SF424 formatting requirements. So Sonia, I'm not exactly sure what formatting requirements you're asking about, but if they have to do with like font and allowable font size, margins, those sort of specs, you're going to follow SF424. If you're asking specifically about how to format it in terms of like subheaders, you're going to look at the funding opportunity announcement for the NI-NH R34. So for those who don't know this, there is no longer a parent announcement for the R34 that disappeared a couple of years ago. And now each institute that sponsors an R34 is meant to issue their own FOA. So Sonia, if you're looking for information more about like how to structure the subheaders for an R34, take a look at the NI-NH R34 FOA, but I can almost guarantee you it's still going to be significance, innovation, and approach. On an R34 within the approach, the one thing that's good, and you have access to my Master the R series materials. You have access to the slide deck and the manual. You can look at that for subheaders within the approach for an R-level grant application, many of which will be the same for an R34. The big difference for an R34 is that you should have a subheader at the end of the approach, so basically the end of the research strategy, where you talk about what you will learn from the R34 that will inform the design of the full-scale trial. That's the whole point of the R34. So you can put that under a future direction section, or you could, have its own section, how deliverables will inform design of a large-scale trial. That could be the header if you want. And sometimes people even structure it like a table. So the information you'll learn, like recruitment strategies, which aim you're going to explore that in the R34, and how the results will inform the future design of the R01, essentially. So does that answer your question, Sonia? I wasn't sure exactly what formatting requirements you were asking about. Great. Okay. I see a floating thumbs up coming. So if we are ready to move forward, I think we're going to go ahead and still feel free to type your questions in that box. And I had a few that were emailed to me ahead of time, and I'll be answering those in a minute. But I do want to get to this this tutorial. So I am going to share my screen. So I'm just going to run through this with you quickly, because for those of you who are applying for a fall submission, these are some of the steps you should be doing now. So all of this is in Master the R series in the preparation part, but people often have questions about this. So I thought I would just lift a chunk of this out and discuss it with you and answer your questions as we go along. So we've already talked, I believe it was 2 weeks ago, we talked about how to use the reporter website to ask specific questions about your project idea. So this is before you've written anything up, you're vetting the idea by going into the reporter website and identifying institutes and program officers that would be interested potentially in sponsoring your project, and also looking at study sections, identifying a couple of study sections. So now we're going to move on to contacting the program officer. So how do you go about doing that? Well, the first question people usually ask is, how do I know who the program officer is and where do I find their information? And if you've identified a target funding opportunity announcement, the contact information is there under Roman numeral 7 in the hyperlink table of contents. And you want to look for the scientific contact. The person should have an MD, a PhD, or both. If they don't, you have the wrong person. So the first thing you're going to do is typically reach out to the program officer with an email to set up this meeting. It's always better to get them on the phone if humanly possible, because you'll get more information that way. But you're going to send an email that gives the name and the title of the project, a short project description, 1 to 2 sentences, a short paragraph at most. I think a lot of grantees have the urge to put many paragraphs in there, but you want to keep this brief, this email. Very important to list your competitive advantage. So for example, your competitive advantage might be that you have access to an unusual or unique biorepository, or some sort of a database, or you have ready access to an underserved population, anything like that, a tool or strategy that you guys have developed that's novel and unusual, something that would be appealing to program officers in terms of, why would they give you money as opposed to the next grantee? What's appealing about you when compared to other applicants on the national landscape? And include the impact. If your project is successful, how will it improve health or advance the field, et cetera? Attach your draft Ames page. It should be, in good shape. Don't send something that's, very rough and poorly thought out. Even if you don't have a really nicely written narrative to introduce the Ames, at least have vetted your Ames with your colleagues and your mentor and have the structure of the Ames really kind of nailed down and in good shape. State why you're writing. Typically, you're writing to ask for a phone call to discuss a variety of things that we're going to talk about in a moment. Make it clear you've done your due diligence. So for example, don't say, I have no idea what study section, help me pick one, because you're not going to get an answer. But if you say, I've narrowed it down to these 2 or 3 study sections, will you discuss with me the relative merits of them vis-a-vis my Ames page? That will get an answer. If you're shopping this to more than one institute, it's absolutely fine to say that in the email. You can definitely say that in the email. I would send individual emails to each program officer, but if they have overlap with the funding portfolio of another program officer, chances are they know that PO. And if there's any question about whose turf it is, they'll hash it out amongst themselves and will let you know. And at the end, just state that you look forward to a brief call at their earliest convenience. Okay, so let's say they have responded to your email. Now what? So you want to be prepared for a brief high-level strategy call to discuss things like, is this the right institute or should I consider another one? You may want to discuss your exact ESI expiration date, and I'm going to review these in more details in a moment, which is the optimal deadline, possible study sections, project type, etc. So sponsoring institutes, so this may be an issue, for example, if you do a mechanistic study, for example, that may or may not have a clear disease application just yet. So mechanistic studies are typically funded by NIGMS, but the minute it tips over into this mechanism is fairly well defined and we're starting to think about its application in a given disease, it gets bumped over to that institute. And where that cutoff is not always clear. So I sometimes have grantees where both institutes say, yes, it's ours, or both of them say, no, it's not ours. Also a problem for biotech projects, whether it's the biotechnology is young enough in its development that it should be funded by NIBIB versus it's developed enough that we're ready to apply it to a disease area and it goes to the relevant institute. So, and sometimes there are other reasons why it may not be clear which institute. So you just want to make sure that it's the right institute and that it fits their funding priorities at this time. If you have ESI status, early stage investigator status, that's for people who are 10 years or less from their terminal degree and have not been a PI on an R01 or equivalent, confers a big funding advantage. So it's important to know your ESI status. Ask your program officer about your ESI expiration. Are you eligible for an extension on it because you did training that was strictly clinical? That's usually removed from the ESI clock. Are you eligible for an extension because of childbirth or parenting responsibilities? Or did you have COVID-related research interruptions? When you're applying for those extensions, I recommend that people do it about a year before their ESI status expires. It takes a lot of months to get the expiration of the extension approved. And NIH wants you to apply for it before your ESI status expires. So you can't, if your ESI status expired last month and you suspect you have an extension, that's going to be an uphill battle to get that approved. You also want to talk about various FOAs, funding opportunity announcements. So which one is optimal? Do you need mentoring, or can you go straight, which would be the K series, or can you go straight to the R series? And that often is a question of how much ESI time you have left, because if you have like 5 years or less on your ESI clock, you may not want to use that all applying for a K and conducting the K. You may want to go into the R series. Do you have enough data to do an R01, or is there less data and you want to do an R03 or R21? You know, do they have a topic specific RFA that would fit the Ames page, or should you go into the parent announcement? If you're applying for a resubmission, you know, are you going to make extensive revisions and put it in as an A0 again, where it's not connected to the summary statements, or are you going to do a resubmission and do it as an A1 where the reviewers will read the summary statements? This is all fair game to discuss with your program officer. And which deadline? And often that has to do with how much preliminary data you have. Sometimes people have questions about their project type, so it may not be entirely clear to them whether NIH considers it a human subjects project, particularly if they're dealing with PHI or biospecimens. There's a great flow chart on the NIH website that I send people to all the time, but often there are still gray areas, and you may want to discuss that with your program officer as well. And you want to talk about the study section with them. You've come up with a couple of possible study sections based on the CSR ART tool, and they are a great person to discuss the relative merits of that study section given your Ames page. And you may be wondering why you would discuss that with the program officer and not the SRO, the scientific review officer who runs the study section. And the reason is that the POs typically sit in on multiple study sections that are relevant to their topic area, and they tend to deeply understand the topics and the potential scientific biases of a given study section. And in my experience, all SROs think that their study section is the right one. It's very rare that, in my experience, that they say, nope, not here, go to another one. And I apologize, we're near an Air Force base here, so you're probably hearing some helicopters. So the goal here is that by the time you sit down to write your application, so this is all at the idea phase, all of these steps that you're doing are at the idea phase. By the time you sit down to write, you know your sponsoring institute, you know your exact ESI expiration date, you've nailed down a selection of funding opportunity announcement, you're sure and firm on the target deadline, you know the optimal study section after discussion with colleagues and the program officer, and you know whether it's a human subjects application, which would determine the structure of your approach and whether or not you have to fill out the human subjects form. So any questions on this? And again, for people who are applying for fall deadlines, you should be doing this stuff now. This is the time to do it. All right. So okay, that's down. All right. How can we do ESI extensions is the question. Okay, that's a really good question. And I don't typically handle that. That's usually done by your pre-award support office. So this is I don't believe there's an actual form for it. I think it's something you actually write out as a free form narrative, but double check that with your pre-award support office. And hopefully they will help you in filling that out and uploading it appropriately or sending it wherever it needs to go. I don't typically do that. The one thing I can tell you is that the more specific and detailed, the better. So you definitely want to include as much information as humanly possible about, for example, if you're asking for an ESI extension based on parenting leave, you want to give the dates of any FMLA that you may have taken so that it's not just a matter of NIH approving the extension. They have to figure out how much to extend it by. So that can get a little tricky. So be as detailed as humanly possible. And as I said, I would do it about a year before your ESI expires because it is going to take a number of months to get the approval. But how exactly one does that, the paperwork, that's all handled by a pre-award support office. I never upload documents. So that's as much as I can tell you. So hopefully some of that is helpful for you, but I would steer you to your pre-award support office. Any other questions before I get to the mail-in questions? I always give priority to the people who are on the call. Of course, these sessions are now recorded and available on my YouTube channel. So for those of you who are not able to see this or want to view this later or recommend it to somebody in your organization to watch, you should be able to receive a link through the monthly highlights emails that will tell you how to access these via our YouTube channel. And if you don't know how to do it and can't figure out how to do it, just email us at info@megbouffier.com and we'll send you the information about accessing the YouTube channel. I think right now we have the ones up from last spring, and we'll be posting new ones monthly. So anytime you can't make the session, just email us questions and we'll answer them here, and you can watch the videos to see what the answer is. So one of the mail-in questions, I tried to really focus on the prep related questions in this session, since that's what people should be doing. And again, I apologize for the helicopters. We seem to be like, it's been quiet all day, and as soon as we start this, it starts up. What are the best times to reach out to the program officer? So that's a great question. And now it's a great time to reach out to the PO if you're applying for the fall deadlines. The worst time to reach out to say you want to ask a question of a program officer on the parent R01, don't send them an email in late September. Boy, is that going to be hard to get an answer out of that person, because they are getting inundated with questions at that point. So I always advocate for people doing their prep steps ahead of time and emailing program officers. I mean, ideally, you'd be emailing them with questions in July, but it's fine to email them now. It's just as you get closer to the deadlines, it's going to be harder to get an answer. So when you do email them, make sure you indicate the time sensitivity in the subject line of the email. So, if you have to email them in mid-September about an October 15th grant, then put in the subject line, urgent question about an October 15th application, so that at least if they have hundreds of emails, they have a way of triaging the ones that are time sensitive and, not a question about a February application, for example. Okay, another question. Can I have an email exchange with my PO instead of a phone call? What if my PO says he or she can answer all my questions by email? So lots of people do this. I think there's a peculiar aversion on the part of some grantees to speak on the phone to the program officer. In my experience, you tend to get a lot more information and much more detailed information if you speak to the PO on the phone, not to mention the fact that you can ascertain their level of enthusiasm, which you are going to have a hard time doing in an email. So, if you have a really simple question like, do I pick a standing study section, or is this FOA, applications to this FOA, going to a SEP? Like that's a yes or no kind of question. You can ask that by email. But if you're asking a series of questions and more generally, like which of these 2 or 3 study sections do you think would be optimal, or does this meet the RFA? Is this responsive to the RFA, or does it meet the funding priorities of the Institute? I would try to get them on the phone to ask those questions. So I think you're just always going to get more and better information that way. All right, so we have another question here in the platform. Is it necessary to confirm the study section with the program officer, even if you are confident that your proposal fit the specific study section for connection purposes? Not necessarily. There are always questions that you'll have for the program officer. You don't have to make up questions just to have something to ask them. I think that's what you're, for connection purposes, I think that's what you're asking. You can confirm it with them, you could confirm, I'm pretty sure this is the right one. Do you agree? But you'll always have other questions to ask them. People have questions like, do I have enough preliminary data to be competitive on an R01? Let me describe what I have. Do you think I should wait for this other publication to be in press before I submit? or would I be competitive now? Do you think that this person should be a consultant or a co-I? Like, how important is it that they're a co-I? There are always lots of questions to ask a program officer, so you don't have to like formulate them in some sort of way that doesn't feel germane to the process for you. Okay, so in our last couple of minutes, feel free to type out any more questions. True or false, POs may know about RFAs that aren't known to the public yet. Absolutely 100% true. So everything at NIH, it's federal, right? So everything at NIH moves at a snail's pace. So it could take 6 months, 9 months, a year or more for program staff to write an RFA and get it approved. So program officers know way ahead of time before RFAs or any kind of topic specific FOAs are announced. And it's another reason that I think it's a good idea to contact the program officer, because there's a search engine at NIH. You can enter search terms and search for active FOAs, but that won't give you ones that are going to be coming out in the next month or two. So, you can also read the table of contents that comes out every Friday afternoon, because there are always notices about intent to publish an FOA. So you'll see ahead of time before FOAs come out, but the program officers know even ahead of that. So it's great to call your program officer and just ask, like, you see the topic of my AIMS page. Do you have any active FOAs or ones that are coming out soon that might fit this, or should I apply for the parent announcement? So that's all we have time for. I have more mail-in questions, but we'll get to them next time. Thank you all for coming. I really appreciate it. And again, these sessions are going to be available on my YouTube channel, and past sessions are available on the YouTube channel as well. And thank you. Thank you for whoever's clapping. Feel free to send questions ahead of time. I'm happy to answer them. It's a pleasure to spend some time with you, and I wish you all the best of luck on your upcoming grant application. Have a great day. Take care. Bye-bye.